From where the West begins in Fort Worth, Texas, to around the globe, you are listening to Talking the Night. I'm your host, Paranormal Phil, and later on in the show tonight, I'm going to be joined by my guest, Alan Thompson, as we talk about his supernatural sci-fi thriller called Creation Abomination. But first, up on the Talking the Night website under the story of the day, world's first genetically edited babies born. Scientists hoping to make children immune to HIV have produced the first ever genetically edited babies. And of course, that sounds wrong in so many levels, but according to reports, an HIV positive woman in China has given birth to 2 baby girls who have undergone gene editing in an effort to prevent them from contracting the disease. The experiment, which involves using CRISPR gene editing technique, has yet to be independently verified and has been universally condemned by doctors and scientists. The team responsible, which was led by, and I'm going to mess up this name and the name of this university in town and everything like that, but or not the university, but the name of the person in the town in China. But I'm going to try. Hijinkisu of Southern University of Science and Technology of China in Shenzhen attempted to disable the gene CCR5, which is responsible for producing a certain protein that HIV binds to when it infects someone. Volunteers were found for the experiment by offering HIV-positive couple-free IVF treatment in exchange for participation in what was described as an AIDS vaccine development program. Now, of course, you can read more of that up on the Talking the Night website at talkingthenight.weebly.com. And we're going to, of course, get into stuff like that and more with my guest, Alan Thompson. So please welcome to the show, Alan.
Thank you, Phil. It's great to be here.
Great to have you on the show. So, I might need to that. I almost forgot the question, but tell the listeners a little bit about you and what you, tell the listeners a little bit about you.
Sure. So my name is Alan Thompson, and I recently published a book in March of this year, and it's called Creation Abomination. As far as like myself and my background, so I worked in high-tech marketing and advertising, mostly out in Silicon Valley in the Chicago area for about 25 years. And about 2 years ago, I decided to pull the plug on corporate America, and I now teach full-time at Brigham Young University here in Idaho, teaching business management marketing, and I'm loving every minute of it. I'm a father of 2 children. I have been married for just over 25 years to my wife, Jules, and writing has always been kind of a hobby of mine, and I finally got my act together and finished my first book in March of this year, and that was when I published Creation Abomination.
All right. So tell the listeners a little bit about a brief amount of what Creation Abomination is about.
Absolutely. So Creation Abomination, as you mentioned, is a supernatural sci-fi thriller, and it has to do with cloning, good versus evil. It has moral and ethical dilemmas, and it gets really creepy. And I love describing it that way. The premise of the novel is the main character. He's working on his doctorate degree at the University of Southern California. And for his thesis, what he's trying to do is he's trying to figure out how to heal injuries to the human body that are normally irreparable, like brain damage, using adult stem cells. That path doesn't work for him. It doesn't work at all. But what he figures out is that embryonic stem cells will, in fact, work. But there's a big catch. And that catch is those embryonic stem cells, those ESCs, they have to come from the individual that is in need of healing. Now, if you think about that for a second, that's impossible. These embryonic stem cells are also called pluripotent cells. They exist for only 18 hours in the gestation process when an embryo is first formed. And then they change and they become everything in the human body, from bones to hair to muscle tissue to skin tissue, that sort of a thing. So he comes to the conclusion that he has to create a human embryonic clone, harvest the cells from the embryo, which unfortunately destroys the embryo in the process.
Yeah,
and that's where the book takes off.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of that has been in the news in the past and everything like that, with embryonic stem cells and stuff like that for help and healing. And of course, with the cloning too and everything like that.
Right. Well, especially when, even just the news story that you mentioned, it was great timing, I think. The news story you mentioned at the top of your radio show here, with them having the first genetically edited baby, it's the same technology. And that's something that I did when I worked on this book, is because I wanted to make it, as realistic and plausible as possible. And so all of the science in Creation Abomination is real. It's factual, and it's based on over a year of research. And so it's actually really interesting to me that they had that story about, genetically editing a baby, which is modifying specific, certain chromosomes and certain traits of that baby to try to do something like make them immune to HIV. And with Creation Abomination, they're literally taking, this idea of an embryo, and they are basically imprinting the traits and all the characteristics exactly to match another human, to create then that exact embryonic clone of that person.
Yeah, and of course, I tried to post news stories that kind of relate to what the guest is talking about. So I found that story, and I was like, this is perfect. And something we can talk about, especially with his book and what it deals with. Now, was there someone that you wrote this book for or about?
Sure. So when I wrote Creation Abomination, really the kind of key thing that was in the back of my mind, and really what I like to do is I really like I guess what I really did is I wrote Creation Abomination for people that really like the thought-provoking and then original science fiction stories that are based on facts, they're based on real science. And I wrote it for people because I wanted to get them to consider really the endless possibilities of things that can exist with a very realistic and plausible narrative. And then I weaved into it this idea of some very controversial and timely topics and issues that we're facing today with regard kind of the moral and ethical issues surrounding the idea of human cloning. If you did create a human clone, is that something that we should even do? If that clone was brought to life and actually was a person walking around, would that clone have a soul? So there's a lot of things to consider, and so that's really who I think I really, and of course I wrote the book for people who are love the science fiction and love the supernatural, the kind of paranormal components of that.
Yeah, and of course anybody that has heard about cloning and stuff, one thing that pops up in most people's minds is, of course, the sheep Dolly. But, of course, one of my listeners mentioned in the chat room, she stumbled on a YouTube video of this guy that claimed that he was a clone and was showing it off. I don't know. Maybe there are.
Maybe they're already here.
Yeah. We already know about possible extraterrestrial hybrids, so it could be basically a clone. Is there a single most important idea in this book that will really catch the reader's eyes when they open it up and read it?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple things. I mean, number one, I have this overarching message in the book that, good and evil, they really do exist. And, that can exist in the mind of a person. It can also exist in a supernatural sense. But there are these good and evil forces that are directly and indirectly influencing our lives. And how I'm trying to present this in my novel is that, it's really up to the individual to determine the extent to which they truly can impact our lives. And I think that's probably kind of the single most important thing, the kind of central message I'm trying to get out.
All right. So, I mean, it's just the whole book basically is what you're saying is really thought-provoking and everything like that with all the stuff that's in it.
Yeah, it definitely is. And this book, Creation Abomination, it's the first of a 3-book series. And the second book comes out, it's going to be coming out Christmas of next year. And I'm already, well down the path in the writing of that. And so it's something which, I don't want to call it a saga, but it's definitely a story which takes, it's more than just one book to present all of the ideas and thoughts and take people through that full journey.
All right. And speaking of thought-provoking ideas and stuff like that, what do you think are the most thought-provoking ideas in the book? And, of course, you mentioned about some passages from the book that you wanted to read, but I want to get your thought on what the most thought-provoking idea is in the book.
Yeah, so in terms of that, it really goes back to kind of the moral and ethical issues that we're faced with currently. And these are things which we're going to be facing in reality in the very, very near future. And this is, the ideas of, can we create a cloned life form? Should we create that cloned life form? Would that life form have a soul? And, finally, what would be the implication on the religious foundation of societies worldwide if that in fact happened? And you can just imagine. I mean, that would be quite a revelation around the world if we were able to do that.
Now, what are some of the? Because, like I said, you mentioned something about some passages that you wanted to read. Do you got anything that would be really thought-provoking to my listeners and everything like that that would want to catch their eye or their ear to want to go out and get this book?
Absolutely. So there's one of the chapters of my book. It's called Night of Nights. It's chapter 23. And this is a chapter in the book, and I'm not going to read obviously the whole chapter, but there's 4 pages here. And kind of to set this up, what's happened is there's 2 things going on in this chapter simultaneously. And the section I'm going to read is what happens at one of the end of the chapter. Someone is actually watching this from an office building out windows over. It's like at nighttime in Los Angeles. And they're seeing all these events occur from the outside. And so what this is doing, this is describing what's happening on the inside. And this is really the point at which these clones actually come into being. And so with that introduction, I'll just go ahead and I'll read here for you.
All right.
Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So a few moments earlier, in a dark and dusty warehouse, Kim laid back across the table of a stainless steel table. Sweat beaded furiously down her forehead and soaked the hospital gown that lay loosely across her naked body. Her legs spread apart and her ankles rested on 2 steel stirrups on either side of the table. Another large square table was situated roughly 4 feet to the side of the table that she occupied. There were a total of 5 bassinets that lay in a circular pattern centered on a square table, with a 6th one situated in the center. Don was standing close to Kim on her left side. He wore a dark, almost cape-like gown that hung loosely from his shoulders. He furtively reached out for her hand, but he had it knocked away roughly by Kim, who glared at him in a menacing manner. Without any warning, Kim threw her head backward as she quickly pushed herself up onto her elbows, straining what looked to be every muscle in her body. The hospital gown, which had previously covered her body, slid roughly onto the floor, exposing an overly sized and oscillating pregnant stomach. Instinctively, Dawn reached forward to take her hand. Slowly and purposely, she rolled her head sideways until her eyes met his. "Do not touch me," she howled through tightly gritted teeth. Dawn recoiled slightly, but knew that he couldn't abandon her. He was going to have to deliver the 6 children that Kim bore within her womb. The next moment later, a loud, deep humming growl filled the air and quickly became louder and louder until reaching an almost deafening level. Looking upwards toward the ceiling of the warehouse, Dawn viewed a dark, circular-looking object that began to stretch outwards in every direction, shimmering as it grew. The only way that Dawn could describe what he saw in the air above him was he was looking at some sort of passageway or portal from a science fiction movie. There were occasional flickers of what looked to be electricity entering into view at the center of the portal and then racing outwards toward the edges in a lightning-like manner. When the circular opening had reached across the width of the entire warehouse, there was a moment of absolute silence. Dawn looked back towards the woman lying on the table in front of him. She blankly stared upwards towards the dark mass and hanging directly above him. "Let it begin," she intoned. Instantly, a dark, black, cord-like tube sprang from the gaping darkness in the ceiling and tore into the side of Kim's body. Straight away, a high-pitched scream exploded from her mouth, piercing the silence. It appeared as if some sort of object slid down from the ceiling along the entire length of the tube and entered into Kim's belly. With a shriek, Kim strained as she grabbed the side of the table and violently pushed out the first child from her body. Dawn quickly ran over, scooped up the baby in a clean hospital blanket, and wiped away some of the fluids which covered his face. "It's a boy," he triumphantly stated. "Turn the baby towards Kim so she could see." Put him in the circle. Quickly," she hissed. "The next one is coming." Dawn responded obediently and placed the baby onto one of the 6 bassinets after cutting the umbilical cord. He stood quietly, staring at the table, and observed the child was oddly quiet. In fact, he hadn't made a single sound since he entered into this world. Without any warning, Kim again shrieked, and another black, artery-like structure erupted from the ceiling and entered into her side, immediately followed by another child entering into the world. He once again took the noiseless child from off the table, cut the umbilical cord, and placed the child into one of the empty receptacles on the outer edge of the circular pattern of the table. The process repeated a total of 5 times until a perfectly silent male occupied all of the bassinets arranged in a circle. No crying, no fidgeting. They lay there quietly and for the most part motionless. Again, the room was filled with a deep, loud rumbling. However, this time it was accompanied by a violent vibration. The windows and walls of the warehouse began to noisily shake. Even the table where the 5 children lay began to shake, as well as a bucket that sat on the floor underneath the table. The next moment later, a large, massive column of smoke descended downwards from the ceiling towards the table where Kim lay. Dawn stepped backwards away from the center of the room, and the colossal shaft reached downwards until it completely surrounded and engulfed the table on which Kim was lying. He was not able to see what was going on inside the dark column, and he wasn't sure he wanted to know. A loud scream, almost a howl, erupted from within the column, and he knew that whatever was taking place was causing excruciating pain to Kim. Looking downwards to where the edge of the column met the floor, Dawn could see what appeared to be a dark, oil-like liquid spreading slowly onto the floor. There was an ear-piercing shriek that came from somewhere within the dark column. And then, without warning, the room was again silent, and the dark column ascended and disappeared into the ceiling. Lying on the table was the sweat-drenched, exhausted body of Kim. Directly in front of Kim lay the naked body of a large newborn female child. And without any warning, an almost haunting whimper came from the child, who slowly began to cry. Kim reached towards Dawn and motioned to him silently to come forward. "Hurry," she hissed softly. "Take the child and complete the ritual." Dawn apprehensively reached forward and took the female child into his hands. As he lifted the baby from the table, he noticed the child was no longer crying. Carrying the child toward the table where the other 5 babies awaited, he looked downward and was met with a calm, steady gaze of the baby looking back into his own. Taking a deep breath, he laid the child into the 6th bassinet located in the center of the table and looked back towards Kim with an almost fearful expression on his face. "Finish it," she demanded. Without a word, he reached down under the table and slid the bucket out on the floor. Reaching into the bucket, he pulled out a large, almost mop-like brush that was saturated with a dark, thick liquid. He glanced momentarily at Kim, who was intently staring at him, and then turned back towards the children. With a brush in his hand, he slowly drew lines of blood connecting each of the 5 outer bastinets with one another. Once connected, he dipped the mop back into the bucket and circumscribed the points of the star that he had just drawn in the circle. Getting up from the table, Kim raised her arm slowly into the air. With beads of sweat trickling down the sides of her face, she uttered the words, "It is done, Father. It is done."
Wow. Yeah, that definitely is really interesting. I mean, it almost has got that the feel of like a Satan baby, along with something like some extraterrestrial being coming down, or like something like that. Yeah, that definitely would catch somebody's eyes right there.
Paints a good picture in your mind, right?
Oh yeah, it definitely does. Now, was there anything that was, because you mentioned you based a lot of it on like factual stuff. Now, and of course, I don't see anything like that happening in real life, but who knows? There's all kinds.
Well, that's
of
the supernatural part of it. There's the scientific part, which is like, you know, all of the actual cloning, and then you know, actually doing the implantation and using the science to make this happen. But then the supernatural elements, that's where I get to bend the rules of science.
Yeah, and of course you don't want it to be all factual, because then that wouldn't really sell anything.
Yeah, that's not going to be exciting, right?
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about a little bit about cloning. Now, have you heard of any? I know, like I mentioned about Dolly the sheep and everything. Like, we know all about that cloning experiment. Mm-hmm. But have you heard of any type of when writing this book, any cloning experiments going on with humans or even animals that helped you write this book?
So there's, I mean, definitely a lot of stuff that's going on right now, especially around cloning, because there's been a lot done, like in the realm of animals and things like that. With regard to humans, the majority of the cloning and things that's going on there is more with regard to cloning and creation of specific organs and tissues for individuals. So it hasn't been to the level of complexity where it would involve, you know, actually the cloning of a complete human being, you know, from their toenails up to their hair. But it's more so, you know, the cloning and creation of organs like livers, kidneys, doing skin grafts and things like that. That would not be because as you probably are aware, when you try to do transplants and things like that from one person to another, even when they're, quote, a perfect match, there still is going to be issues with the body accepting and potentially even rejecting the tissues or the organs that are provided. And oftentimes what happens with people when they have organ transplants is they'll take medication that actually helps their body to not completely reject that organ, and so they can have that organ be with them for the long term. So there was a lot of research I did, and it did incorporate a lot of kind of the more modern and actual things that were happening today. And there was also just a lot of research done into, you know, what was even, you know, possible from a scientific perspective. You know, how realistic is it to do that genetic imprinting and to, you know, make an exact replica based on, you know, at the genetic level of the different traits and the chromosomes and everything like that to perfectly match a specific individual.
Yeah, and of course, there's a lot on cloning, like you said, about animals. There was actually a story in July of last year where they talked about bringing back Ice Age beasts like the mammoth.
I remember
I don't know if
Yep.
anything ever came of it, but you never know with the way some of these things go on in secret and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Just trying to figure out where I was in my questions. Now, of course, how long did it take you to write this book?
It was a process. It took me in total 6.5 years. And so, and actually, if you think about it from when I originally had the idea to when I wrote the book, it took even longer. So the idea that I originally had for Creation Abomination, I had back in 1995. And at that time, and this was when it was really kind of a far-fetched thing. You know, people think, "Ooh, cloning," and how could that even happen? And one of the inspirations for that was Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. And I had read the book and I saw the movie, and and Michael Crichton is also a very scientifically sound, kind of based on fact, but then makes it an exciting book with a great storyline, lots of action, and so I took that inspiration and then built that into at that time in 1995 a 28-page outline, and then I let it sit for literally about 15 years, and then back in 2010, because life got in the way, right? You get busy.
Yeah.
And back in 2010, I got to the point where, I got to write this thing, because if I don't, I'll be looking back with regret, and I didn't want to have that. And so at that point, I took a year. I did quite a bit of research, and then it took me a lot longer than I think it really should have to do the actual writing, and that was because I was doing it on the side as I worked at my full-time corporate job, and I was teaching part-time as I was, starting to get ready to move over into the academic world and be a full-time professor. And so it was, kind of had to have the two planets align with regard to having time to do it and motivation.
That's the same thing with me. I work a full-time job. I do this radio show at night 5 days a week, and all the other things for it. And then that's where I have trouble trying to find time to finish my book and my screenplay and everything like that. But one of these days I'll get a chance to finish it. But hopefully not 15 years down the road.
No, don't wait that long. Don't wait that long.
Real quick, let's see, where was it? Oh, speaking of cloning, one of my guests says, or not my guest, my listener said, I would be afraid to be cloned. What if it turned evil, like in movies or something like that? Did you incorporate something like that in your book, of like a clone turning evil?
Yeah, so here's the thing, and this is, there's a part in the book where I actually quote Revelations, and I pull in parts, and I'm not to give away too much of the plot here, but I do pull in some comments and some quotes from Revelations, especially where it talks about the war in heaven and the third of the host of heaven being cast out. And when you keep that in mind, and you think about the kind of that big idea and moral issue of, if we created a clone and it was brought to life, would that clone have a soul? And now let's connect the dots. So if man's creating a life, mankind, then and that life is brought to bear, does it have a soul, and what kind of a soul is that?
Yeah, and of course, there's always that dilemma. Like even when you mentioned Jurassic Park and everything like that, they just created the creatures and didn't think about what that possibility would happen when they got loose. But we're at the first commercial break, but we'll be right back with more with my guest, Alan Thompson, as we talk about cloning, more on ethic dilemmas, good versus evil, and so much more. We'll be right back. For those on Santa's ghost hunting list, GhostStop.com has what you need to put that great gift under the tree. Right now in time for Christmas, GhostStop.com has a S-Box Ghost Scanner, new and now on sale for $69.95. Or how about something to stuff the stockings with by getting a laser grid scope for just $18.95. Just click on the banner ad at the top of the Talking Tonight website and get Christmas shopping today. GhostStop.com, your one-stop shop for all your ghost hunting needs. Do you have a paranormal team? Are you a small-time author? Do you have a radio show that you would like to promote? Is there anything that you would like to get the word out there about but don't have a big budget? Well, Talking Tonight has an opportunity for you to sponsor the show without breaking your wallet. Contact the show at talkingtonight@outlook.com or on the show's website or Facebook page for more details. For those on your Christmas list that love the paranormal and love to read by a fireplace, pick up a copy of Nicole Gaspard's book, Haunted Vessels and Cursed Objects. You can find the book on Amazon.com, on the Barnes & Noble website, or by clicking on the banner ad on the Talking Night website. Pick up a copy for that book-reading, paranormal-loving fan.
You keep on crying to me, saying you're gonna leave. Well, now if you're gonna go, darling, I'll get the door. Why should I change myself? Why should I change for you? No, I will not lay down. I am not chained to you. And I am what I am.
Okay, and we are back with my guest, Alan Thompson, as we talk about his book, Creation Abomination, and cloning, and so much more. Now, of course, we were talking about cloning before the commercial break, but let's get into the whole thing about good versus evil. Now, when you mention good versus evil, are you talking about like the heaven and hell, or are you talking about real world things, or both?
I'm really talking about both, and that's the the main idea where I mentioned this kind of or an earlier question. I was talking about how evil can exist in the minds of individuals, and we see that all the time here on Earth in news stories and what individuals do to themselves, do to other people, or be it like the shooting that happened in Vegas to World War II. There's all kinds of examples of that where I firmly believe there truly is an evil, and that evil does exist in people. And then there's also the evil that you spoke of, behind the angels and demons, between heaven and hell. And you have, because there's always the opposition that exists, that's out there. And you have, of course, different agendas or different goals. And so that's what I really wanted to draw on, was both of those elements, to play it not just kind of on the supernatural side with angels and demons, but also want to bring in the component of how individuals and their decisions they make also plays into that as well. And then, of course, then there's the interplay between the two, where you have kind of more of the supernatural influencing more of individuals, directly and indirectly.
Yeah, because, the only time I'm really evil is during Halloween, because I love scaring the hell out of people. But
that when I'm playing a game, because I like to win, so I've been known to cheat.
All right. So what are some of the moral and ethic dilemmas in this book?
Yeah. So the moral and ethical dilemmas. This gets to the ideas of if we and I've talked a little bit about this. If we should we even go down the path of creating a life form, and if we create that life form, and the premise of the book of actually creating a human embryo and then harvesting the cells from it, it really brings to light that question, which is goes back even back to Roe v. Wade, which is when does life begin, and is that when the embryo first forms and you have the fertilization of an egg, is it when the egg is actually begins to transform into a recognizable life form? Is it when that child is born? And so that really is underscores one of the really, I think, the key moral issues and ethical issues in my novel, which is should we be doing that? When you do that, is that actually killing or taking the life of another being? And that, of course, and that was also part of the balance in writing this novel, is I wanted to write it in such a way that it was presented so that the reader could make up their own mind. I didn't want to just be like, and here's my opinion, I want to force it down your throat. I wanted to, of course I do have my opinion, but I wanted to do it in such a way that individual, and this kind of gets back to that whole, thought-provoking and trying to bring about a lot of conversations between people about this as an issue.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, there are so many ethical and moral dilemmas. Even when going back to the whole Jurassic Park thing, I mean, it was pretty much prevalent in that movie about creating these creatures and knowing that they could get loose, they could kill people and stuff like that. And it's
right.
Like, why? But
right.
when we're talking about
even the
like,
point in Jurassic.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just saying, even the point in Jurassic Park where they modified those dinosaurs to a point where they supposedly could only have females, so they couldn't reproduce. So it was basically creating a life form and taking away the rights of that life form to reproduce like every other life form. And it was, so then do we own it? Right. So that's, definitely another issue there.
Yeah. And of course, at the end of the first movie, I believe it was the first movie, where they found out that, or it showed at the end of the movie, the eggs and stuff like that. And if they were all female, then why were there eggs?
Yeah, they were all. Yeah, they were, and I remember in that because they were reproducing. Then of course they brought to light that they used like the DNA of like some frogs from tropical rainforests, and they said that in some like ecosystems, like when it was all females, that the female frogs would spontaneously become male, so they could actually reproduce. So that's kind of how they tried to explain that.
Yeah, and of course, when we talk about cloning, do you, if we ever got to that point, do you ever see something like that possibly happening? And do you mention anything like that in your book?
So that's actually a real it's a really interesting question, because you think about you can apply that same logic, which is, hey, so if say we created clones, say we created like a whole slew of clones, we had males and females, would we create them when we created them? Would we, in fact, kind of like what they were talking about with that news story, and making them immune to HIV? Would we engineer them in such a way that they could not reproduce? Or would that be an attempt? And if by doing that, are we then actually saying, well, okay, we created this person, but we don't think it's a real person? And so we're not going to give them the ability to reproduce. So there's so many, there's so many angles that you have to consider when going down that path. And of course, everybody's going to have a different opinion. And that's where I like people having constructive conversations, not those destructive where they're so polarized and, well, I'm right and you're totally wrong, and now let's just argue about it. And then I feel like I'm watching any news channels right now.
Yeah.
And, either side of the aisle, they just like seem to like yell at each other.
Yeah, and of course, with my show, what I do is I like to open people's eyes to the different possibilities of things. I mean, of course, I got my opinions, and I'll state my opinions, but I also want people to open up their minds and think about things like this and other things, so that way they might have their own opinion, but be like, okay, yeah, if cloning does happen, is this actually going to be a good thing for us or not? And just open their eyes to a different way of thinking rather than being told what to think. And that's what's happening in our world today, where a lot of us are being told what to think and not opening our eyes to the other possibilities.
Yep, totally agree. Then it's, even to the point of telling us what's okay, what's not okay, and it's. I think it's ripe for a constructive conversation, but I haven't found that we've been able to have real constructive conversations, especially like in a public forum or format, very often. It always tends to end up being super polarizing, but that makes for good TV.
Yeah, of course, and of course, ratings sell everything for TV, so and even radio.
That's true.
So why is it important to you to have the science in this book to be as plausible as possible?
So for me, the one thing which, because I'm like even though I don't have a degree in biology, I'm a science nerd freak. I love science, and I always have. And it drives me nuts when I'm reading a book or if I'm watching a movie and I know a little bit about the science, and I'm going, that could never happen. It's so out of the realm of possibility, and it makes it so I just like, if I'm loving the movie or I'm loving the book, and all of a sudden I'm like, okay, I hate this. And so I love the fact when it's based on accurate and plausible science, and for me especially, because I really like the idea of the thriller component of the book and having some scariness to it. And it's not scary in terms of like blood and horror, and gore kind of a thing, but it's, super suspenseful, edge of your seat, nail biter, you can't put the book down, that kind of a thriller where it's got you, looking over your shoulder, wondering what's behind you. And I think when you bring in the plausible science fiction, it heightens that level of suspense. Because now, and that's what a lot of people who've read the book, when I'm talking with them, they're like, yeah, like I'm reading this thing, and then like I finished a chapter and I close the book, and I just kind of think about that for a second. I'm like, that could really happen, and it really creeps them out, and then they want to read some more. So I think that's why.
They close the book. They're like, okay, what if that did happen? What if I was cloned? Like my listener said. Let me find that comment on the speaker chat here real quick. Just trying to remember.
That's where they're saying that it was like evil or something?
Yeah, if the clone was evil and everything like that. And something like that, it's just, it makes your mind think, well, what if this happened? What if this happened? And that's what I was talking about, like to open people's eyes to see the different possibilities. Now, of course, you mentioned being real interested in science, everything like that. I mean, I have a science interest in science to an extent when it comes to like the paranormal, but for me, it was more history. I'm more interested in what happened in history, and of course, with that too, when we're talking about cloning, we're going to look back and look at what happened in history to see what brought a point upon that point Even going back to Dolly the sheep, I mean, that was a while back, quite a while back.
Right. Yeah, like in 95.
Yeah, so, I mean, of course, history is going to repeat itself. So, like I said, who knows what could happen in the future. Now, let me find the question that I was going to look, because we were talking about the, and I think I scrolled
The
down
science
a
fiction
little
being plausible.
Yeah, I was just trying to find the next question on my list here. Is there any point in the book that are actually based on factual events?
So no, it's a very original narrative and plot. There's not. I mean, I do. So well, there's a reference to an actual event, and that was back in 2003 when it was George W. Bush, and he passed a law saying that you couldn't use embryos for medical testing unless it was before a certain year, and anything after that year couldn't be used. So I do reference that, and that actually plays into the storyline in terms of like availability of embryos for their testing and process and stuff like that. But other than that, it's very imaginative, original storyline.
Okay, yeah, and of course, talking about stuff like cloning and stuff like that, a thought came to my mind about different like cartoons and even like The Simpsons, because you probably heard things like The Simpsons predicted it and everything like that. I believe The Simpsons also did something on cloning in one of their episodes, but I wonder if they actually got information that, because some of the stuff they had on the show actually comes true, but who knows? But of course, one of my listeners said it would be, here's another moral and ethic dilemma as far as the whole thing about clones. You talked about them not possibly, do they have souls? Would it be something like that? But and I keep scrolling on the wrong thing here. It would be, what the heck? Okay. Something went weird here. It would be nice to have a clone to do your chores and stuff like that. Now,
oh yeah,
that would be the upside of things and everything like that.
That would, but then that also brings up. I mean, the first thing that brought to my mind is, okay, so if you did that, then are we making that clone? Basically, you're saying that clone is like a subhuman, substandard, and they're just going to do your bidding.
Yeah.
And so you're automatically classifying that into like a sub life form.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just pretty much, it would be pretty much a robot, basically, at that point.
Yeah.
So let's see what we got here. We got 11 minutes before the break. Now, let's see. I'm trying to find where I was because I keep scrolling on the wrong thing. Now, what are some of the other moral and ethic dilemmas that you have in the book? Or talk about like the moral and ethical dilemma of, because do you just talk about cloning, good versus evil and stuff like that in the book, or is there other things that come up in the book that pose a moral and ethical dilemma?
I mean, the main issues and dilemmas are the ones that I've already talked about. I mean, there's going to be subtopics and things like that, but the primary, grab you by the collar of your shirt and shake you ethical dilemmas are going to be those around cloning and whether or not those clones, if they're a real human, if they have a soul, and if they do, where does that soul come from? So I think we've definitely covered on those issues.
Okay, yeah, because what I'm thinking about is when you talked about the clone having the soul and everything like that. If God created the souls and everything like that, and created us and everything like that, if we're creating it, what is gonna does, like you mentioned, does that child or that person have that soul? And why are we playing God and stuff like that? That's the big moral.
Well, and that actually, I kind of alluded to that with the idea of, should we be creating and would that have a soul? And in terms of the impact to society and to the religious components of the world, if there was a clone that was created, that would absolutely bring into question, probably first question for a lot of people, if mankind is creating a life, what does that mean? Does that mean that God doesn't exist? Does that mean that it truly is just, a swirl of atoms and elements and hap chance that the life's created? And that would have a dramatic impact on societies worldwide. So I think you hit that one right on the head there. I think that's another real critical and core dilemma that this presents.
All right. Now, when you started writing this book, was there a certain process that you used as far as getting all this information to help you write the book?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so the process that I did, so I when I had I kind of built that big outline like I talked about, and then what I did is I actually started with what I thought was the pinnacle chapter of the book, and it's close to the end of the book. And so I wrote that chapter first, and then I went back in time and I wrote from the beginning of the book forward, and basically I knew where I wanted things to end. And so then I actually weaved the storyline and the plot and linked the characters and built the events that would bring us to that point. And
all right, so you basically wrote one part of it and then kind of just formatted the rest on that, basically.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. Yeah, I had the details in mind for the beginning parts, but when I actually that was just kind of more in an outline format. And when I actually got to the writing of the book, I didn't start with the very first chapter and the first page. I started on chapter 35, or what ended up being 35.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know I used to write songs. I used to be a singer-songwriter, but I'm getting too old for that in the music business. The music business is a young crowd. But what I would do is when I'm writing music, I would start a lot of times with the chorus and base the rest of the song off of that.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely. It's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, so that's basically the same premise that you use, is writing that one thing that the book was going to actually be about, and then kind of base the rest of it off of that.
Yeah, very much.
All right. Now, did your environment or upbringing play any role in your writing, and did you use it to your advantage?
I think the main way that did was, I was always brought up, I love science, and I was always encouraged to, read scientific books and do science projects and that sort of thing. And I think really what that ultimately led to, though, was just me having a real open-mindedness to possibilities, and in terms of like understanding, what could be what could be the cause of something and understanding kind of at a fundamental level, but then bringing in this open-minded kind of component of supernatural elements and how those things may impact or influence or interact with us in the world. And so that's, I think, the combination of those two, being brought up in a home where I was encouraged to think kind of out of the box and to sometimes think really out of the box, really kind of led me down the path of being able to create Creation Abomination.
Yeah, and of course, if you're not thinking outside the box, you're pretty much a mindless drone that's going to follow along with everything. Maybe you're a clone if you're going to do that. But
yeah, you're.
But yeah, no. Like I said, I like to make people think outside the box, and what it sounds like with this book is it makes you think: could this happen? What could happen? And all these questions that come up, and I think I got a bunch of. I got people in the chat room with a bunch of questions ready to ask you coming up in the second hour. They're already posting the questions. It's like, whoa, hold on, wait till the second hour.
I love it.
So let's see, we got 3 minutes till we go to the top of the hour break. Now, what made you write in this genre of book and sci-fi?
So with science fiction, so I love science fiction because it's all about possibilities of what could be or what alternatively is, and having the idea of having plausible science fiction that allows you to create an idea or even sometimes a world that anybody could connect with because it's based in fact. And then you sprinkle in a dash of that supernatural. And it adds that layer of fantasy or magic that can break through, like what I was talking about this a little bit earlier, break through some of the limitations that science might have. And if you do it right, it enhances really what that kind of plausibility of the storyline. And the thriller component, those are some of my favorite movies. Again, not the gory ones. I don't like those, but the ones that are, they've got you, that raise your blood pressure, make your palms sweat, and you just can't take your eyes away. You can't, from the book or from the movie. So that's, I think that those are kind of the elements that I enjoy the most, and that's why I wanted to weave that into this story.
Yeah, and of course, I've always been that horror kind of fan, but I also like that thriller, that whole aspect of making me think, okay, what's going to happen next?
Right.
What happens if this happens and that happens and everything like that? So we are at the top of the hour here. So we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back with more with my guests. Also, we're going to open up the phone lines and the chat room for your questions for my guest, Alan Thompson. We'll be right back.
Do you have a talk radio, Facebook Live, or YouTube show and would like guests for your show but don't know where to go to get them? Well, go to radioguestlist.com and sign up today. They have all different experts in different fields, and you can find the ones that are just right for your show. That's radioguestlist.com. Sign up today. It's free.
If you like finding out about different things in the paranormal field, such as ghost stories, haunted locations, UFOs, cryptozoology, and much more, well, check out Into the Paranormal on YouTube, and be sure to subscribe to the channel. Videos are posted once a week. When you click on the banner ad at the top of the Talking the Night website for Lola Scarborough, contact her and mention Talking the Night, you will receive a 10% off discount code and link for the book Fighting for Our Tits. And on Friday night, one lucky listener will have a chance to win a hardcover copy of the book.
Cutting away, sanity, honesty, and all the ties that bind. Cutting away, suffer the consequence of all the times I lied. Do you follow the hollow when you feel like you're all alone? You're so disconnected.
To call into the show, Skype Talk in the Night, or by phone at 817-717-5561. And now, back to Talk in the Night with your host, Paranormal Phil. Okay, and we are back with my guest, Alan Thompson. Now, of course, during the break, he tried to pop in the chat, but I guess there's something with Spreaker. Now, I do have people in the chat room, so if you can pop in the chat room, pop in, say hi, let me know you're listening, if you can do that. For those that tried to get into the chat room and can't, I'm going to see what I can figure out what's going on there and fix that problem as soon as I can. But let's get into some of the questions that I do have here in the chat room, and let me find those. But the first question is, and this person asks, I don't know if you answered this or not, is it possible to clone like real dinosaurs? Do you think that might be a possibility? Now, of course, we talked about the whole thing about the story from last year, July of last year, where they wanted to clone mammoths.
Right.
But do you think that's a plausible idea that might happen, and do you bring up anything like that kind of cloning in your book?
Mm-hmm. So to answer, I'll answer the second part of the question, and then I'll answer the first part. The second part of the question, so I don't bring up anything like that in the book in terms of like cloning dinosaurs or trying to get DNA from previous life forms and then creating a clone of them. To the first part of the question, absolutely. I think that, the idea, just like, they created, the Dolly sheep, and they've done lots of other animal clones over the last 20 years, even to, cloning cows and things like that. As long as you have, a fully mapped, DNA strand structure, and you can recreate that, then absolutely you can. I firmly believe that you would be able to do something like that, very similar to like what they kind of laid out in Jurassic Park. The one thing which they called out was potentially the dilemma where you would have holes in the genetic structure, and that's where they use the idea of trying to fill in the gaps with other DNA from another life form that they had fully mapped, like the one that was alive today. And I think that probably had to do with the fact that the DNA was not, quote, fresh. It was, something they pulled that had gotten like captured in amber, and they were pulling, 100 million year old DNA out, and then trying to, recreate it based on that. But I think as long as you do have that complete genetic mapping, that you would be able to do that.
And of course, there's that whole thing about the gene splicing and everything like that. What do we create if we combine the two genes, the two DNA strands and everything like that? What do we get there?
You get something real freaky.
Yeah. Of course, I just watched the new Jurassic Park movie, the Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, where they created a raptor and a genetic modified raptor where it could actually follow human command and everything like that. Now, real quick before I get into another question for my listener, not because of like dinosaurs and talking about that movie, but is that a possibility that something like that could happen in, like, say they clone like a police dog or something like that, to where, or any other kind of animal, I should say, actually, because police dogs are trained to obey commands, but any other animal to obey commands. And is that something that you might have explored in your book or when writing it?
So I don't explore that in my book, but the idea of, would you be able to, somehow influence the genetic structure so that it could be more teachable, that would, because basically if you just, like say you clone, for example, a dog, right? Like you talked about with the police dog, that dog would have the same, cognitive capabilities, the same, intelligent factors, that, the dog had before. And obviously it wouldn't have the memories because it didn't have those experiences and that wasn't built into its brain. But it wouldn't, I don't think you would, if you made an exact clone of it, it wouldn't have a greater ability to learn. That's where there would have to be some type of genetic, creating a genetic elixir to do something like that. And there, I think you have a lot of, I think the science for that is probably beyond us right now. Because like you think about, what's the genetic difference between a human and a chimpanzee, and it's barely anything. But that barely anything is the difference between Mozart and Michelangelo and Bonzo. So there's quite a bit that goes into, it's one thing to create a clone and to have it be that exact duplicate, and it's another thing to then really kind of change the nature of that life form to become something else, or to be able to learn to become something else.
All right. Now, of course, when you mention cloning in the book, you talk about, and correct me if I'm wrong, but talk about just actually creating a new life form. But the question is in the chat room is there doctors and physicists working on DNA strands to clone people's tissue for a longer lifespan, and I believe there are things where they're cloning different parts of the body and stuff like that already out there in today's world. But what is your thoughts on that?
So there's definitely there's a couple components to that question. There's definitely work that's going on in terms of trying to figure out how to create tissues, how to create organs. In fact, they are creating clones and creating exact matches of organs, and that's happening today. The idea of creating, basically creating a clone of someone to like lengthen the life of that person. I think there's also efforts that are going on to figure out how to and be it to the point of, and there I don't know if it's really cloning or if it's just more scientific application to try to either slow down the aging process, to try to increase the healing process or the ability of cells to replicate and replace themselves. So there's a lot of science that's going on. I mean, it's a very active field in terms of doctors working on this. There's stories in the news. There's like some stuff. I think it was from South Korea. I think a couple times where doctors said that they had created a human clone that in fact was not true. And then so I mean, if you just Google cloning, you'll find all kinds of stuff about active studies and research projects and things like that.
Yeah. Now, here's another question. Let's see how this is worded here. I don't want to read it word for word because sometimes it messes me up if I do read from word to word. But what is the... Let's see. Hold on. I'm going to just read this real quick just so I make sure I get this out the right way. Holds with a personal memory. Now, okay. So basically the question is, when a clone is created, what is the first thing that cloning that holds, that brings up that personal, or does it have any like personal memories? And I know you covered this, but for anybody just tuning in to the show, about the whole personal memories or anything like that with the clone and everything.
Right. So, creating a clone, like from a sheep to even the idea of creating a human clone, essentially you'd create that clone. It would be formed as an embryo. It would grow throughout all the stages of gestation through the normal development until the child was the clone is able to actually sustain life on its own outside of the womb. And that's of course when a child is born, and that child which is born, it has no memories, right? It has no knowledge. It's experiencing everything for the first time. And so it would have to, form those memories and experiences to then be able to build its, basically its own knowledge and create new memories. Now there's like ideas out there. There was if I can remember the name of it, I think it was called The Sixth Day. It was a movie with, and I'm embarrassed to mention this, but it was a fun movie. It's an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. And the idea behind it was, they actually would create like a full-born clone, or a fully grown clone, and they took like a picture of the person's brain. They did like a scan through their eyes, and they were able to basically create like a digital recording of everything that their brain had experienced, and then they could imprint or download those memories into this clone starter, I guess you'll call it, like a full-blown, like a blank. It was just waiting to be then turned on. And so they were able to somehow transfer the memories and they will kind of allude to the transferring the consciousness of that person into the clone. So hopefully that answers it. It's not something that the clone would not be inherently born with. It would have to actually experience life and create those memories for itself. Okay,
yeah, and speaking of Arnold Schwarzenegger, that was actually brought up in the chat room earlier. They were trying to figure out the movie that dealt with the cloning, and they could not think of the name of the movie, but they were thinking Arnold Schwarzenegger and stuff like that. So,
yeah, there was another movie. Yeah, there was another movie. It was called The Island, and that had like Scarlett Johansson. I'm a total movie buff. I love movies, but it had Scarlett Johansson and Ian McGregor in it. And basically, what they did is they had created like clones, and they had them like at the same age as the person who was alive. And if something happened to the real person, not the clone, then they would basically use the clone that was created as basically a resource. So they could say, oh, you need a new kidney? We'll just work it out of the clone. You need a new heart? We'll work it out of the clone. So that was another movie that kind of played on that concept.
All right, yeah. Now, getting into something like cloning plus the good versus evil, kind of mixing the two together, because sometimes I love to play devil's advocate and throw out weird questions.
Sure.
But it, like I said, it just makes you think of the possibilities and everything like that. But, and I want to know if you ever covered something like this, possibly in the book. But when you read that excerpt, yeah, if I can talk tonight, from the book earlier, about that weird baby thing and stuff like that. Now, what is your thoughts on, like, if somebody was, if they did clone a person and say it had like that evil gene to it, what kind of, I mean, thinking back to, like I said, being a major history buff and everything like that, cloning people like Hitler, Stalin, Mao, stuff like that. I mean,
yeah.
And you mentioned they would have to create those own memories, but
right.
What if they found a way to actually incorporate those memories into that clone?
Oh, that would be scary. The idea, so I guess the way I'd answer that is, so it's in that chapter that I was reading, it, in fact, because it's like on the front cover of my book, it has angels and demons on the cover. And they play a very active and pivotal role in the book. They actually push the plot along. And so you do have this interaction between the supernatural elements and the real world elements. And in that chapter, I guess the only thing that I can say there without giving away too much is when those like black cord-like structures were like coming into Kim before she gave birth to these clones, there was something that was actually like being transferred through those coils and into those babies. And and that's where you start thinking about, the idea of possession. And it also brings up to that other question of if these clones, were created, would they have a soul? And that's a very central, pivotal part of the book, which is, they do have a soul, and it's the nature of that soul, which is brought into serious question.
Yeah. Now, there was another
How's
question.
That for a roundabout way to answer it without giving away too much?
Yeah. Yeah, true. Now, well, it's not really a question, but somebody goes, I wonder how much it would cost to have a clone done.
Oh, goodness.
Probably an arm and a leg and a brain and a torso and everything else. Zombies. Now, that actually brings up a thought right there. Would like a clone be like a zombie? Basically, since it wouldn't have those memories and everything like that, or maybe it doesn't have that soul, would it be something like a mindless zombie?
Right. Well, I mean, I guess, so if you thought about it, kind of connecting to an earlier thought that I had, if you thought about it like you created this clone and it was like an adult right away, but it didn't have really any memories, didn't have any experiences, and so it was just kind of fumbling around, then I guess it could kind of be like a zombie with just kind of this innate desire, I've got to feed, I've got to have brains, whatever. But with how I present it in Creation Abomination, you really have, it's almost kind of the almost kind of opposing positions of you have a child, which is born and it's, brought into the world that does not have any memories, but at the same time you have some kind of an evil element, which is accompanying that. And that's actually then guiding it and decisions it makes and kind of directing the individual or what that being is going to become.
All right. Now, here's a real good ethical and moral question here. And, of course, say they clone somebody. What happens if you don't want that clone anymore? Like, say it turns out that you wanted it, and then it turns out to be a bad seed, like Hitler or
Right.
Mao and stuff like that. I mean,
Right.
what happens there?
You take it down to the local pound. No, just kidding.
Yeah.
That's the question, right? And it's like, okay, so you have this life form, but you've determined it shouldn't be alive, based on your reasoning and your viewpoint and perspective. And so then, what gives you the ability to then say, I'm going to go ahead and destroy that because I created it in the first place? It really does. I think it really highlights just huge issues that we face every day. When someone decides to not bring a baby into the world, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, wait a second, what's the difference? Kind of a thing. Is it because the person's walking around and talking, and then there's that whole nature that we're talking about here, which is it's your clone, it's your mad scientist creation, however you want to refer to it, but you don't like it. So I'm going to just destroy that now. And
I think that was brought up in the last Jurassic Park movie about they created these creatures were created, but they came with that point that of course they were trying to sell them and everything like that, and there was that group that was like, let's destroy these, let's take them out, they don't need to be here anymore,
right.
And everything like that, let the volcano destroy them. And of course there's that whole thought, what do we do if we create something like that? And it poses a danger to us. What do we do? Do we play God again and just completely destroy it after we play God to create it?
That brings a interesting thought to my mind here, especially you think about, and this has nothing to do with the book, but it's just interesting. You think about human life on Earth, and well, what if this human life here on Earth, and I'm just throwing this out here as just for food for thought, what if this human life on Earth really was a science experiment? What if there was an alien civilization who came down, they laid the seeds of DNA, and they let us run for 400 million years, and they came back and they decided, you know what, I don't like Earth anymore. We're going to wipe it, and we're going to start over.
Well, believe it or not, I've had guests on my show before talking about something like that. And of course, I love watching shows like Ancient Aliens and everything like that. Those real thought-provoking shows and everything like that, because not only do I like to fill my brain with a lot of knowledge, which I'm surprised it holds that much, but I also like to think outside the box what it could happen and everything like that. And there was one guest that I think we were talking about, Atlantis or something like that, and the ancient aliens, the gods and stuff like that, saw that they were, and I think it's also brought up in a movie, I can't remember, I saw something about it the other day, but it wasn't a movie, it was Ancient Alien episode or something like that. But I know Ancient Alien is not my sponsor, although I wouldn't mind having them a sponsor. But where that got destroyed, and we were talking also, I think, with this guest about Noah's flood and everything with the animals and everything like that, where it wiped out that ancient civilization to bring in a new civilization. Where did that civilization come from? Where were we created, and how were we created, and everything like that? There's a whole Adam and Eve thing. That's the show that I was referring to, that I had the guest on talking about Adam and Eve. I just can't think of the name of the show right at the moment. But we were talking about that whole thought of things being wiped out and starting anew. And, of course, there is a question that is going to kind of go in with this, if I can get to it. And if we did found a way to create a clone with some type of intelligence without it having to learn, do you...
Right.
I mean, it's the whole robots taking over the world type thing. Do you think they would take that knowledge to overthrow us?
Honestly, I think there's a good correlation there to what you described in terms of kind of, artificial intelligence, like with a robot and potentially with a life form, that there would naturally be a difference between, quote, and I'll call it like natural humans and then these clones. And so there'd be like a difference in status. And then because of that, there would be probably some animosity, some difference in terms of rights and abilities. And I can easily see where, you have these cloned humans basically not taking kindly to either their status or how they're treated, and them wanting, or them actually coming to the conclusion, hey, we're better than everybody else because we're, genetically engineered, and we are going to take everything down a different path because we think everything should be like us. Yeah,
and of course, I kind of see it in what's going on today as it is, not the clone thing, but in them taking over the world or anything, but like that, but with a higher class of people saying we're better than everybody else, let's take them out. The movie Elysium brings to mind that whole aspect of the, or even Hunger Games. There's that higher class of people and the lower class of people, and they want to just wipe out that lower class.
Right.
And stuff. And that just brings up that whole aspect of what happens if that's the case. Right. Whether it's the clones taking us over or we're going to fight against them and taking them out.
Right.
The whole
wasn't Elysium?
Yeah.
Sorry, wasn't Elysium that was with Matt Damon, right?
I believe so.
Yeah. Okay, I remember. I was trying to remember that one. That's where they had the
the big old space station,
low level. Yeah, the space station where they had the real rich people up, and they had all the people on the planet Earth who were the lowlies and the not well off, and they were basically helping support all of the people that were up in space. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there was actually something about cloning in that movie, if I remember correctly. But I can't remember. But it dealt with a lot of human regeneration of cells and stuff like that. I know that much. I just trying to remember back to that movie, trying to dig deep into my subconscious to think about that.
If I remember correctly, they had like these medical pods or bays where the people that were not the rich ones, they didn't have access to it. And so he was trying to get this one woman up there to be healed, because really you could heal everybody on the planet who had all these congenital diseases and degenerative things like that. And but they didn't allow access to those people. They only gave it to the other ones.
Yeah, and of course, like one of my listeners said, I think some movies may have a bit of truth to them, in which they do. every movie's going to have some kind of, well, unless they popped it right out of their head, but every movie, every book is going to have some truth to it. It's just not going to be the actual factual truth. They're going to do like you did with your book, is take those facts and kind of mix it into that supernatural base and everything for your book. But we're at the last commercial break of the night, but we'll be right back with more questions for my guest, Alan Thompson. We talk about his book, Creation Abomination. We'll be right back.
His thoughts can drown out the world. I hear them around me. They don't mean a damn thing. Moving forward with no place to stand. The fight just is over. We'll lose its taste in the end. We're just fighting demons on the road. Create the creatures locked inside our own. I wish that you could see, that you could be.
For a limited time only, get 70% off a digital version of Creation Abomination when you click on the banner ad at the top of the Talk in the Night website and mention Talk in the Night. Also, if you click on the Goodreads link beside Alan Thompson's picture on the Guest of the Show page on the show's website, you will be entered into a contest where you could win a free digital copy of his book. Only 100 are be given away. This Christmas, pick up a copy of Lloyd Champion's book, bringing the paranormal field out of the dark ages for just $2.99 on Kindle, or purchase the paperback for just $9.99 when you click on the banner ad at the top of the Talk of the Night website. Also, this Friday during open lines, you have a chance to win a free Kindle copy of the book. By clicking on the Spiritual and Broke banner ad at the top of the Talk in the Night website and you sign up on Jennifer Noel Taylor's website, you will get the first 3 chapters of her new book, Spiritual and Broke. And this Friday, one lucky listener will have the chance to win a free copy of her new book when it comes out, as well as her other book, Love Incorporated.
Still as a breeze, a river flowing deep. Don't wanna leave the air you breathe. Living mirrors dreams when I think of you and me. Don't wanna leave the world you see, and I will hold you down if love is still alive. It's all for
To call into the show, Skype Talk in the Night, or by phone at 817-717-5561. And now, back to Talk in the Night with your host, Paranormal Phil. Okay, and we are back for the last half hour of the show. The Spreaker chat room is open. If you can pop in there, say hi, let me know you're listening, ask a question of my guest. Also, the phone lines are open. You can Skype me at Talk in the Night or by the phone at 817-717-5561. Hopefully it doesn't kick off my guest, but the guest knows that if it does, he'll call right back. But we'll get your question in that way too, if you want to call into the show. So let's get into some more questions that we have here in the chat room. And let me find the last one that we had here. Let's see. How will we know if we all could pass by a clone on the street or in the mall? Like, if there was a clone, how would we know that it would? Well, of course,
We wouldn't.
if we do, if it is a clone of us, Of course, we're going to know it's us.
Yeah.
But how
That's
do we
me.
know
What's
that
going
it? Yeah. There's that whole thing of doppelgangers and everything like that.
Yeah.
Look like,
I was just thinking doppelganger.
but how do
Yeah,
we know that somebody that passes us by is not possibly a clone?
Right. So I would say on the surface, there'd be no way you would know unless there was some type of a trait. Like say when we went to create a clone, that no matter how hard you tried, it always had some kind of anomaly or abnormality, if I can say that right, with it that would stand out. And then short of there being an abnormality, you probably the only way you could test that was probably through some sort of like a blood test or other type of a scientific test. And what that makes me think of right away is if you remember the reboot of Battlestar Galactica, and they had the aliens, they're the Cylons, and they had the human Cylons that were on the ship, and they didn't know who was human and who was actually a Cylon, a clone, a reproduction, and it created hysteria on the ship, and they literally developed a blood test to figure out who was a clone and who wasn't, and one of the characters on it, I can't remember his name, Goltar, get something. It was some weird name, but he was like a doctor.
I think it was
who figured
like
out the test.
Goltar or something like that.
Yeah, and he figured out the test for it, and then it turned out that he in fact was a clone himself. And so I think just on the surface, probably you wouldn't be able to tell. There'd have to be some type of a examination to know that.
All right. Now we're going to get one more question from my listeners because I want to get some other things in before we end the show. What do you think the world would be leading towards in the future in cloning, and why?
Let me see if I just understand this question correctly. So if we were to go the cloning route, why would we be doing it? Like for a specific purpose?
Yeah.
And so there, gosh, I think part of it is just human nature of wanting to create and figure things out, and why do people climb Mount Everest? Because it's there. Why do we go to the moon? Why are we considering going to Mars? Because it's there and it's an accomplishment. So I think that's part of it. Is just us pushing ourselves and being able to achieve and to do more things. But then kind of what's the like a driver behind it? What would be the purpose of creating these clones? How do we use them? Wow, that gets you. There's everything I would probably throw out there would be a maybe like a conspiracy theory or something. I don't know. It could be we'll create these clones to colonize new planets. We'll create clones so we can go to war with other countries and not have actual human lives get lost, but it's these clone lives that get lost. But all those kind of theories kind of go back to an earlier comment I made, where you're looking at a cloned individual as like something less than a human, not a natural human, and so there's kind of that division of class again between those that are cloned and those that aren't.
Yeah. All right. So I want to get into some of your writing stuff on writing this book and everything before we end the show tonight.
Sure.
Tell us probably one of your most rewarding experiences since publishing this book.
I would actually let me give you two. So one that I love is when the rewarding experience. I love connecting with somebody, like at a show or an event like Comic-Con, and where I'm talking to someone for the first time about the book, and I'm walking them through the storyline, and I can visibly see them getting excited about the book, and they're getting enthusiastic, and I can tell kind of by their body language, their expression. I love that because that's just super rewarding to see someone who's never heard about this before, and then when you describe it to them, they're just like, wow, that just sounds awesome. And the second thing that I love is if somebody who has, and this happened a few times because I've done, probably about 6 shows since I published in March, and 6 or 7, and where I have someone that comes up to me a show that bought the book previously. And I've had it where they purchased it at another show, and I've actually had it happen where someone purchased it on a Friday and came back on a Saturday, and they just have this big grin on their face. And I love them. They think, "Oh, I loved your book. I love the story. This was my favorite chapter. This was my favorite scene." And then, of course, my favorite question is, when does the next book come out? So it wasn't the rewarding stuff for me wasn't publishing the book. It wasn't getting it out there and saying, "Oh, I wrote a book." The rewarding experience is hearing from people that they love it, that they enjoy it, and just getting their excitement about it. I love that.
Well, I definitely got a listener in the chat room that says definitely want to check out your book. Now, on the characters in the book, are they just purely made up, or like I know there are some people that'll base characters off of real people. Like in my movie screenplay, I'm gonna base my characters off of real people and everything like that, but without kind of changing their looks and their name and everything like that. But did you just create the characters, or was it based off of people that you know?
So at some level, I think whenever somebody does this, whenever they write a book or a screenplay or something like that, they have to draw on what they know. And so while I didn't draw on a specific person, what I did is I drew on my experience with people and their personalities. And, so I had kind of this idea of the character, their personality, their behavior, who they are, what drives them. And then I would draw on my own life experience with people to help build a very realistic picture and image of that person to make them a believable character and one that people can relate to.
Okay. Now, was this book more plot-driven, or was it more the character-driven type of book?
So for me, myself, I'm probably more of a plot-driven writer. And that kind of goes to my talking about how I wrote that, I kind of had the big outline of the detail of the storyline. I wrote that pinnacle chapter first, and then went back and then kind of filled in the gaps. But at the same time, a story, doesn't matter how good your story is, if the characters are hollow, they're just, you can't connect with them. And so I think primarily I'm a plot-driven writer, but I definitely realize the importance of having characters that are something that people can connect with. Because without that, it doesn't matter how good your story is. And
the plot could be there, but if you don't have the interesting characters in the book, it's just not going to go nowhere. Now, was there any particular type of stuff that you studied in writing this book, or any people that influenced you in writing this book?
I would say in terms of like studying, so I mean, I did like I talked about with doing the year of research. I did a lot of internet searching. I did a lot of reading of research papers and studies, and reading scientific journals. I mean, stuff that people, oh my gosh, you honor. I love that stuff. It was just really interesting to me. And so that's why I had to make sure that I love science and I love the factual information and stuff like that. Otherwise, I never would have been able to muscle through that. But that I love that stuff, and so I just tried to. And as part of that process, I'd learn something new, and then that'd take me down an entirely new path. And so I dig into, I've got to learn about therapeutic cloning now, and what that means and how that works. And so that was the process that I really did. In terms of if there was like one person in particular who influenced me, I don't think that there was. It's not like I know a scientist or like a PhD to someone to say, you inspired me to write this. It was so I don't think that component of it was there.
Okay. Now, of course, like you taught there, that even when I'm talking about some things, I'll be talking about something, and of course that whole thought-provoking thinking outside the box just pops into the box, and it's like, pop out here and think about this. It's like, okay, yeah, and sometimes I get sidetracked, but it helps go off in different directions while staying in that same direction. And did you find something like that happen when writing this book?
I did, but I was pretty good at making sure that I would identify, hey, I'm going down a path which is just interesting to me, and it's not going to be real productive in terms of giving me knowledge or information that I would utilize in, building the story, the plot, the theories and things like that. Mm-hmm. But it's not to say I'm perfect at it. I mean, I definitely would go down stuff, and I spend like half a day looking at something and be like, oh, okay, well, that was kind of a waste. I mean, I learned some new stuff, but it wasn't something I could build into it. So,
it didn't have nothing to do with the plot. It's like, okay, that was interesting, but it's not part of the plot here.
Yeah.
All right. Now, other than selling this book, what do you hope to accomplish with this book and when you wrote it?
For me, and I've kind of alluded to this a little bit as we've had the last couple hours together. I really want people to have thoughtful and respectful, they're very key, both of those, thoughtful and respectful conversations about these controversial topics. And, you're talking about creating the clone life form, should we, can we, does it have a soul, implication on religious foundation societies, being able to have those thoughtful conversations in a way that's productive, not destructive. And I think that's kind of one of the things I hope it does. Well, proof's in the pudding. We'll see what happens.
Oh, yeah. And now, do you have any more? Because I've heard authors talk about this where they get writing something and they think, okay, I could add more to this. And I think you mentioned this at the beginning of the show about writing a kind of almost like a series type thing. But did you come across something like that happening where you wrote the book and thought, okay, I should have added this. Maybe I'll add to this in the next book.
So I would say yes. As I was writing the book, I actually came up with ideas that I hadn't thought of because I had the full storyline pretty much built out, and so I was like, oh, I've got to make sure I add that to the next book. But something which happened, I would say frequently, but it definitely happened a good number of times. And as I was going, and this was part of the editing process, as I was going through, I'd realize there's a major hole. There's something that I just haven't addressed. I haven't either connected a dot or I haven't created some type of a situation or event that happens that will leave the reader being confused. And so a lot of times I had to go back and find, basically I've added, in one case I added an entire chapter to it once I was done because it was severely, it was very obvious that I needed to. And one of the things which, as I've been working on my second book, because there'll be like time breaks in the first book of the series, and what I found is a really neat tool in my second book is I go back in the second book back to the first book in one of those time gaps, and you get to actually see the events happening from someone else's perspective, and you get a little more insight into what occurred, and that helps you understand why a character did something in the first book, which you might be kind of questioning. And so I like the intricacy of going back and weaving that in.
All right. Now, of course, I wasn't going to take any more questions from the chat, but this actually brought up an interesting question. Now, I'm not going to read the question exactly as it's written in the chat room, but there's a twofold to this question, and that is, did you cover it in the book, and what are your thoughts on the question? But the question is about cloning people or aliens or animals after they passed away.
Oh, interesting. Well, so I guess the initial response that I have there is, for what purpose? Right? So I mean, like if I died, and my family said, "Oh, we really miss Alan." They probably wouldn't say that, but let's pretend that they would miss me. And they said, "We want to have Dad back." Okay, well, we'll create a clone. Well, you're creating a genetic duplicate, and I'm going to, maybe they can grow me to be that full person. But that whole issue that we talked about earlier, the lack of experiences, the lack of memories, that it just wouldn't be there. And so that question of, well, why? Now there's another angle to this though, and let's say you have a endangered species who is killed, right? And and we're doing that left and right on the planet. There is a purpose, and we let's say the California condor, we weren't able to get them to repopulate, and they died. Well, through genetics and cloning, maybe we could bring them back if they had gone extinct. Or you think about all the different species of tigers that have gone extinct in the world. If you have their DNA, you could bring them back. So I see there being a purpose on, like when you think about the animals and stuff like that. On the human side, I don't know what that purpose would really be unless you could somehow like import or download and make that person exactly who they were.
Yeah, and of course, bringing up the whole thought of the animals, cloning like extinct animals and stuff like that, what I talked about earlier in the show, with the cloning of the woolly mammoths and talking about Jurassic Park. What point do we reach that we got to say, okay, bringing back certain types of extinct species is okay, but bringing back stuff like dinosaurs and woolly mammoth, what purpose is there for that? Yeah,
besides just saying you can do it. Exactly.
Yeah. All right, now we're getting close to the end of the show. Now, who do you kind of market this book for? Who should really buy this book?
So definitely anybody who loves science fiction, and especially that real plausible, the realistic storyline to science fiction. Also, I'm a fantasy freak. I love David Eddings, Robert Jordan, and so people who enjoy fantasy will really like Creation Abomination because of the supernatural kind of paranormal elements to that. I think will really resonate with the group. And then as far as interests, people who, like the kind of different areas of like suspense, supernatural, paranormal, genetic engineering, and thrillers, I think those people will love Creation Abomination.
All right. And where can people find the book and be able to contact you?
Absolutely. So lots of places. So I have a website, www.creationabomination.com. And on there just has a lot of information about myself, the book, my background. Has information on, you can actually purchase on there. It takes you right to the Amazon site. You can also just go directly to Amazon. You can either search on Alan Thompson, and I come up like number 2, or you can search on Creation Abomination. I come up number 1. I have a Facebook and an Instagram page, and you definitely can follow me on those. Just do a search on Creation Abomination. I own those as well. And finally, if you want to purchase a copy of Creation Abomination, you can get that on Amazon and also on barnesandnoble.com. I've got digital and I have paperback available on Amazon. And actually, right now, I'm actually doing a special for listeners of the show. Normal price of my digital copies are $9.99, and I'm selling those on Amazon right now for $2.99. And so I recommend, if you're a digital reader, go for it. I'm a physical book reader, and I just holding it and having it. So it just depends on people's preference. And then you can pick up a hardcover book on barnesandnoble.com.
All right, and of course, all that is linked up on the Talk of the Night website at talkofthenight.weebly.com. And of course, there's a banner ad where you click on that, mention Talk of the Night, and when you purchase the book, and of course, it's a limited time only. Like you said, 70% off the digital version of Creation Abomination. Just for you, the Talk of the Night listeners. So I want to thank you again, Alan, for coming on the show. It was a great pleasure. Definitely a very thought-provoking show and everything like that. And
thank you. I had a great time.
Made the listeners think. So tomorrow night, what we got coming up on the show, we're going to talk with my guest, Jennifer Noel Taylor, as we talk about her new book coming out next year, Spiritual and Broke, How to Stop Struggling with Money and Live Your Purpose. And then, of course, we're also going to get into her other book, Love Incorporated. And I just cannot think of the name of the book, the rest of the title of the book offhand here. Let me find it. So many websites open on my computer that. Okay, Love Incorporated, the business of doing what you love. We're going to get all into that tomorrow with my guest, Jennifer Noel Taylor. And, of course, check out the website. We got Story of the Day, This Day in History. And for those that tried to get into the Spreaker chat that couldn't do it, I'm going to find out what's going on with Spreaker, because if it's a problem with Spreaker and everything like that, I might have to move my service over to another one, another service or server, which I'm planning on doing anyways next year when I start up my radio station with other hosts on it. But that'll be coming up. And of course, if you want to sign up for the Talk of the Night newsletter, where you can find out interesting stuff, stories of the day, go back to old shows, you'll get all that for just $2.99 when you subscribe to the show. And for those listening on Spreaker, go to Spreaker.com, sign up for an account, follow the show, find out what's coming up, when I'm live, everything like that. So again, thank you, Alan, for coming on the show. It was a great pleasure having you on.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Have a great evening.
You too. And for those listen, tomorrow night we're going to be joined by my guest, Jennifer Noel Taylor, as we talk about Spiritual and Broke, how to stop struggling with money and live your purpose. And of course, that's what I'm trying to do here. Also, if you, real quick before we end the show, I want to mention that if you want to advertise on the show, contact me at talkofthenight@outlook.com. I have some great rates for you. So until tomorrow night, I shall see you on the dark side. Good night from Talk of the Night.